We're going to move on to district learning supports and alternate community programs. And I see Krista is here.
Yes.
Krista, go ahead.
Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about our alternate community programs and our sides and continuing ed under the district learner supports umbrella. Our alternate community programs are a ministry designated type 3 facility. So that means that we have to have some over and above pieces when students are going to our school. So we have to ensure that every student has a student learning plan, and we have evidence of the work that we're doing with them that's over and above what they can be offered in a mainstream school. And we also have to have a pretty significant focus on some transition planning. So, and is it to graduation? Is it back to their school, or is it into community or adulthood? So at the bottom of the slide there, you'll see all the different programs under our alternate community program umbrella. We have our Teen Moms program, our YAP school program that is out of the YAP building downtown, our Intersex school program, and then we have our program at John McGinnis, where we have grades 8s to 12s in those alternate pieces. Next slide. In terms of online learning and continuing ed, so there's lots of different acronyms for this one. It's this is our sides, this is DL, this is our distributed learning or distance learning, and continuing ed is also considered adult ed sometimes. So very similar in the sense that they also are required to have a student learning plan and have a different level of attendance, or a different way to ensure that there's some active participation with their students, and that the student is a student who would be a good fit for online learning. So needing to make sure that we're meeting those requirements at the ministry level. Also, just wanted to make the point that homeschooling is an entirely separate piece and isn't connected to the distance learning or online learning portions of our sides programming. And in terms of continuing education, so adult education, where we're supporting our adults with their grad requirements and upgrading or any prerequisites that they need, they can do that on site at JMAC. We also have some running through our Teen Moms program and our YAP program as well, because some of the students that are connected down there will stay on when they're adults. In terms of those two programs and looking at our truth and reconciliation and the decolonizing that work that we're doing this year at alternate community programs, we're really looking at ways that we can decolonize our student learning plans and even the process that we go through with them. It's one of those things where we have to have them and it's a ministry requirement, but how can we do it differently? What questions are we asking? How are we framing those conversations? How are we, how are we coming to the table, and what are we bringing to those conversations? So we've been doing some work with Dr. Dustin Louis on that, and really looking at our student learning plans through the strength-based perspective. So having students consider why is this space a good fit for me, and why am I here? And what does good learning look like for them, and kind of developing that with students and staff. But we're sort of just at the very beginning of those pieces. So just kind of starting to have those conversations even with staff and stuff. Looking at the community self-esteem model and how everybody in our school community, adults included, are feeling about our community. How do we contribute? How do they feel part of it, if they have any identity with our community? And that one's been an interesting one because it's come up quite a bit for us this year in terms of what we've noticed with our students in terms of how they feel about their former schools, or how they feel about their experience with education, where they'll tend to feel quite comfortable in our space and still have some resentment or some anger or different feelings towards how it went for them in other spaces. And we do want to look at how can we repair that a little bit for them, or how can we make some reconnections so that when they leave our systems, they can kind of see it as a whole picture. And quite often there's lots of people sort of rooting for them from the other side too, and just being able to kind of acknowledge that with them, because that's come up quite a bit. In terms of sides, we've added Indigenous education workers as part of their team, who are doing lots of outreach and have kids coming on site and home visits and meeting with families, and also integrating some of their work into the online portion, looking at the intake process through an equity lens. So ensuring that families have access to technology. If they're unable to access things through technology, how else can they provide the materials? And then also looking at the resources themselves around the Indigenous ways of knowing, and those online portions having some different activities for them to do, and some more place-based things and things that they can do even out on the land. And they've also developed the English First Peoples 10 and 12 that they've been offering this year as well too. So where are we going? Our health programs have been in transformation for a couple of years now, just really looking at sort of inclusion, equity, and compassion as we're doing this work. So what is the moral purpose, and why do we want to ensure that we're being inclusive to everybody? Looking at using a compassionate lens when we're approaching behavior and trauma. So when we're talking about discipline, or when we're looking at those pieces, how can we do things differently, and how can we look at, again, back to sort of that repair piece, how can we look at repairing some things, and how can we approach them in a different way? I think this has also been a theme throughout this meeting this afternoon, but looking at ways that we may need to adapt to the needs of the student instead of the student adapting to our system. But I think through our alt programs, I'd like us to be sort of more the on-ramps for belonging around that, and how can we start to bridge back to schools or to other programs and ensure that we're being a support on either end. Recognizing that when we remove from programs or classrooms, that is another rejection, often for students who have experienced a lot of that. And again, back to that repair piece. And then through our grad success coach, she's been looking at lots of the data in terms of what the stories are of the students who've come over to us, where their learning needs are, what kinds of connections they've had through their transition in the middle years, monitoring some ways that we can intervene. And quite often there's some interesting little stories in there in terms of their gaps and even maybe lack of advocacy for them. So just keeping our eye on those pieces. And then the sort of how we're doing a lot of work in our building and kind of outside of when we're going through the referral process around shifting some mindsets in terms of, needing a program to fit the student, more, again, looking at what does the student need, not just a program. And sometimes we don't have the answers, and sometimes we don't know what they need and we can't really get to it, but being a little bit more, taking a pause, I think, there for a little bit, and trying to figure out what we can all do, because we actually have lots of great things happening in our district. Support for our staff, so lots of good in-service and training. So acknowledgement that while we're making these changes, there's lots of vulnerability in that, and there's lots of ways that can feel difficult for my staff over at ACP. And how can we engage in a bit more training so that people can understand where we're going. Consistent regular messaging, so meeting with secondary principals and our counselors in secondary, so that they have an understanding on how the referrals pieces go and what we're looking for, and even how we can collaborate on a larger level. And we can be there sort of to walk alongside with them and do some learning. And then again, the trauma-informed focused and trauma-focused intervention training. We're doing a series right now with one of our district clinicians every Wednesday, and it's going really well. And again, looking at our programs overall. So what are the needs of our learners in our district that are at the top of our tier, and how can we grow those programs or build some more stronger connections within our community to support them. In terms of rural, I just wanted to make sure I put this in here because obviously I grew up in McBride and I came from Mackenzie. So always think about them in terms of these district learner supports. In terms of sides, that service is the same. And then at ACP, I obviously don't have students coming from Mackenzie or the Valley, but we have been out a couple of times and have been having conversations with the principals out there, just in terms of how can we help develop some pieces for them or support them in the work they're doing. I believe and have seen it that often they're doing a decent job out there anyways, and being innovative in their staffing and their community connections. And sometimes the things that they are struggling with are the things that we're struggling with as well. So again, not having all the answers, but going out and checking in with them, supporting them through some workshops and staff in service has been happening. And then looking at the sustainability is a bit of a challenge, I would say, because when you look at the Valley and Mackenzie as well, when we're staffing those programs, I think after specific staff are gone, sometimes it's hard to maintain them. And sometimes it's hard to find the staff in the first place. So that is all for me.
Thank you, Krista.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments for Krista in her presentation? Trustee Warrington, I see you unmuted.
Well, I'm just, once again, it's how we're addressing the needs for all students. And these are that when people understand the tier program, the tier situation, the 3 tiers that you mentioned, Krista, that it's an understanding of what service, what students really are needing in the learning experiences that you're providing. So that may be another conversation that the Education Programs and Planning Committee could talk about is that the whole tier structure. It's just a thought. I just know that the needs are so great. And again, I'm just looking at the whole idea of how we're decolonizing learning. And I think that's a message we all are hearing loud and clear, how we move away from the way in which we used to address these issues to a much more strength-based approach, looking at the learner. I think I heard you say not having the learner fit into our programs, but that we build programs to fit the needs of learners. I think that's critical. And so I don't have any questions, Krista. I just think that there's a lot that we can learn more about the needs of our students across the district and how we are addressing them. And this is another component of that level of need. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments?
Maybe I should add one more thing. And I applaud you, because what we did here again today in our meeting was the importance of our teachers, our staff, having that in service and that training to be able to make, to shift our mindsets towards that whole concept that you were talking about, Krista, of adapting, not having students have to adapt to our system, but we find systems that adapt to them. And teachers, having been a teacher for many years, knowing how important that support is to help in that transition as we move through it. So I really applaud the importance of the staff in service and the training that goes into supporting these students. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to you and your entire team.
Yeah.
It's, you know, and Trustee Warrington is right, is the big theme is doing things differently in our meeting this afternoon, and decolonizing, and the work has begun in this department. And
Yeah.
I think we're going to see the results, and or have seen some of the results already of that work. So thank you.